Good morning, everybody. A happy new year. As I was just saying to my colleagues there, feels very trite saying that, given that we've come back in January to to another lockdown, which nobody wanted. We'll go into detail in this webinar a little bit about, touching on the subject of why was this third nearly lockdown so necessary, and why there is perceivably more restriction on driver training and testing this time, particularly around key workers in a moment. Olivia's just doing her wizardry, putting this live on Facebook, because obviously these webinars are always extremely popular. So bear with us whilst we monkey around with the screen there. We've hastily, and I'll admit hastily because it's all my fault, cobbled together a presentation that covers a wide variety of topics within the overall subject of the latest lockdown. We're not going to be able to cover everything in there in details today, but there will be further updates coming out for DIA membership in the next 24 hours. And as we progress through this lockdown and we get updates from third parties like DVSA as well. So bear with us. And we're also going to obviously allow time for Q&A in this particular session as well. Olivia, do you want to just guide people as to how best to ask their questions during this session?
Yes, so good morning everyone, happy new year to you all. As you say, hopefully the year will get better. If you could, you will find in your controls, those of you are used to it, we ask for you to put your Q&A, your questions in the Q&A box. And if you could put any chats that you might want to discuss things amongst yourselves, any chats in the chat box. But we will be responding mainly to the Q&As questions in the Q&A box. So that would be brilliant if you could just put all your questions you want to ask us and any comments and things like that to us in the Q&A box. That just makes things a little bit easier for us. That would be fantastic. Thank you. That's about it.
Great, thanks Olivia. Okay, just a quick introduction of who's here. I'm not going to be arrogant enough to assume that everybody knows who I am, although I am a massive gob on a stick, so I do get about quite a bit, and people do tend to know who I am after a while. I'm Carly Brookfield. I am the Chief Executive of the Driving Instructors Association and Diamond Advanced Motorists and any other things that we're involved in as well. I have with me Olivia Baldock-Ward, who is our Head of Training and Professional Development and one of our very experienced driver trainer experts within the organisation. We're also joined from our team on the driver training side by Howard Wedwood, who's our Head of Road Safety, and again, another very experienced driver trainer himself, still working at the coalface, so knows all the pain of what it's like to be a driver trainer at the coalface at the moment. And also we're joined by Mark Yaffe, who is our Chief Motorcycling Examiner and our rider training expert, so is the person that will focus very much so on the rider training testing and elements of today's presentation. So that's us, folks. I think that's everybody who's with us, apart from Tom, who's lurking in the background, who is our training manager and helps us keep things running smoothly and on track as well. So I'm really glad you could all join us today, although it's unfortunate that we're in this position of having to do these webinars again. We obviously don't mind doing this, but we want to help, but I'd rather we didn't have to do them because I'd rather we weren't in this position still. As I said, in this presentation, we're going to look at some of the reasons for this latest lockdown. What do we anticipate the path out of this lockdown to be, and the timelines for that, how this is impacting driver and rider training and testing, and what you can do yourselves and with us to help navigate your way through this latest lockdown to that light that is, if we're going to be positively minded, at the end of the tunnel with the vaccination process, hopefully, and the fact that it's being ramped up in the UK in particular as well. Okay, if we can just tab on to the first slide, Olivia. I've just got to try and remember what I've actually just cobbled together in the last 24 hours.
All right, there we go.
Okay, so I wanted to just focus on, I'm sure you've seen it in the news, so I'm going to be teaching grandmother to suck eggs in some respects, but just for those people who haven't necessarily read up on this, why is this latest strain so worrying? There's a new variant of the coronavirus. This was identified in December in the UK. Now, there's lots of chat about the UK has caused this particular strain, and I'm not going to get into this yet. If you actually listen to some of the real experts, they will actually say to you that we're very good at testing in the UK. We're very good at identifying new derivatives of viruses that could have come from a global source, not just in the UK. And that's why we were quicker to identify this strain than anybody else. So we've been tagged with it as a UK problem, and where the source of it, actually that might not necessarily be the case. It could have been circulating elsewhere in the world prior to December, but unfortunately we've been slapped with the UK variant of this because we're just very good at identifying viruses. The alarming spread is one of the reasons for a third national lockdown. The variant that we have at the moment is called the VUI 2020-1201. It's a snappy title. It carries a mutation to the gene, the original gene, which attacks us, which forms spike proteins. And this forms grippy rods on the outside of the virus cell, which attach to the human cell. So if you imagine the COVID cell that you've probably seen as a graphic many, many times on the news now, this new variant has the ability to grow these grippy little rods and be even better at attacking our human cells that are desperately trying to fight off all kinds of viruses. The vaccines that we have launched in the UK at the moment and worldwide work on instructing the body's own cells to produce these spike proteins that then attack the foreign object and develops those antibodies that we need to attach the virus and get rid of it, and actually help us fight it again. So the question now is, can the vaccines that we already have in train deal with this mutation of the virus that we've got in the UK at the moment? And there's been some negative coverage to say, oh, it's really worrying, I don't think that's going to happen. But actually, as days have gone on, there's been some more positive coverage from the actual experts working on the vaccine, saying they're actually confident that the vaccines can deal with this new variation. So, however, we do have this problem. We do have this strain in the UK. It's not necessarily that it causes a greater issue in terms of the illness itself. It doesn't necessarily cause the illness, the symptoms of COVID and what it causes in terms of pneumonia and all of these kind of life-threatening impacts of COVID to be worse. The problem with this strain is it's so damn virulent that it can actually spread at so much faster a rate and attack so many more people than previous strains. So this is the problem that has caused this next lockdown. The infection rate is increasing more rapidly, impacting more people, and that's why we've had to go into this national lockdown. So I thought it was important just to reiterate why we've had to do this if you haven't actually seen that in the news. I'm sure most of you have. If we can tab through, Olivia. So obviously training and testing is the big question. Why can't that take place? Currently, we were allowed to do some level of testing and training in the last lockdown for key workers and a greater variety of key workers, and we subsequently be able to do so. Why can't we do it there? Again, I would go back to the fact that this strain is more virulent. It's more easily transferable. The infection rates are higher. So government is being super cautious this time to try and bring that infection rate and not cause any opportunity for further infection to take place. So their view is that encouraging any level of travel or interaction between the public, which is not absolutely necessary, is deemed as just too risky at this moment in time. And training and forms of vocational training where, you know, even there's a greater level of social distancing achievable are also being thought of in this respect. Now, Mark will make a very valid argument as to why rider training could actually take place. There are representations from us and vocational trainers who work in areas, for example, like LGV, where more distancing can take place in some respects, or you're working with full license holders, and so you're not necessarily in the vehicle with them. But the opinion of government at this moment is it's just too risky to allow anything that could increase that infection risk exponentially. Obviously, there is a watch and review. I think we've had the knee-jerk reaction, and I'm not being unfair that it is a knee-jerk reaction. We have to react in a knee-jerk way sometimes to developing situations. It'd be lovely to be planned and cautious and sensible about things, but sometimes we just need to react. So at the moment, the government is in a reactionary phase to this particular strain and the rising infection rate and the pressure on the NHS. As with anything, as we develop our understanding and as we regain control as much as we can by having more lockdown measures in place, it will be reviewed at weekly intervals what restrictions can be slightly lifted or negated throughout the process. And I'll embellish a little bit more on that in respect of key workers in a moment. But just right now, it is lockdown, shut down, and try and control that virus and not allow it to overwhelm the NHS. As we can see in some areas of the UK, that's not just, you know, propaganda or by the NHS or hystericism by the media. There are NHS trusts that are already reporting a critical emergency situation, that they're already being overwhelmed. So that is the issue that we're trying to contain here. Can you tab forward, yes, Olivia? The big question is, alongside why can't we train, can we train key workers, what am I going to do about my finances because I can't work, all those, which we'll try and cover some of in this section, is, you know, when will we be out of this lockdown? When will we be able to unlock and train? So as I alluded to at the top here, with the rapid rollout of 2 vaccines in the UK, there's at least some light at the end of the tunnel. If the vaccination programme can be actioned at the rate the government has forecast, it is anticipated that some restrictions can be eased by mid-February. So they are reviewed on a weekly basis by sector, but they are set to be reviewed overall by the middle of the February. And the PM has talked about a potential close to this lockdown at the end of the school term, half term, on the 19th of February, depending on the success of the vaccine rollout. Sadly, if this even keeps to its schedule, it's still going to be the second longest of the nationwide lockdowns we've experienced in the UK, and then we'll clock in at 45 days if we go to mid-February compared to 50 in the March restrictions and when they were eased, and 27 days that we were locked down for in November. However, you will notice, and this will happen more so, I think, over coming days as they struggle with the realities of taking a vaccination programme that was theoretical when they were talking about rolling out to one that is now in train in real life. The government promises on end dates might get a bit more vague. And as we're seeing today in the press, there are some issues with resourcing of the vaccine, logistics of the vaccine that may slow things down a little bit. And Michael Gove, who's always a cheerful soul to listen to, has already told outlets like Sky News that March is possibly more likely the point at which we will see a bigger easing of restrictions than mid-February. However, this is something we're just going to have to keep you know, updated on throughout the process. That's just the information to date about what the lockdown pathway looks like out of lockdown. But as you know, it's going to change every minute what the viewpoint is. But I would anticipate it's probably going to be, you know, right into March before we see, you know, a return to normality for as many industries that are impacted by not working as possible. So if we move to the next slide, Olivia. We've asked DVSA previous to this national lockdown, we actually asked a question in December when the vaccination programme was being, you know, kind of, we talked about in more realistic terms, as in it's going to happen. We've got some vaccines now and we've got the ability to roll them out. We've asked DVSA what the timeline would be on examiners to be vaccinated. If the great hope is vaccine, rather than just, you know, kind of risk mitigating processes like good hand hygiene, you know, limiting social interaction, limiting non-essential travel, all those kind of things, you know, then we do need to know when that's going to impact the front line for DVSA. So it's a question that we'll keep raising, you know, when will examiners be in line to be vaccinated? We of course realise that frontline NHS workers, care workers, you know, those people who are going to look after us if we unfortunately you contract COVID, as many of our friends and family have unfortunately done so, are the priority here. But what is the cascade from then on? What are the priority groups that will be able to access vaccines? And, you know, we're asking DVSA to keep us updated as to what happens with examiners so we could get testing rolling again. We've also asked the question, what would be the policy? Will it be a mandatory programme for them as employees, or will it have to be an opt-in scheme and, you know, those who won't take the vaccination would not be working? So we don't know at this moment in time. I'm sure DVSA are struggling with those questions as well. It's not just a question that they have to consider and they can make decisions on. Unfortunately, or fortunately, in terms of the rights of examiners, they also have to consult with the unions, the examiners themselves, and get everybody's buy-in to that process as well. I am writing, I've just drafted it and sent it off to our editor so she can take out all the waffle that I am normally guilty of and keep me on track, to Nadine Zahawi, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for the COVID deployment process, to ask them to consider driver and rider trainers as a secondary priority group for vaccination. Now, those of you who have loved ones working within the NHS, I can understand why you might raise an eyebrow at me thinking, you know, that driver trainers are as much of a priority as nurses and doctors and police and fire and all those people who are involved in frontline services that have to carry on being delivered. I'm not saying that you guys should be a priority, much as I would love you to be. I'm a pragmatist, but I am asking if there is going to be a secondary focus in terms of priority, in terms of industries or professions that have a value and have a contribution to public health and public health risk management, and how we get them back into play doing that vital job. And also because of the unique exposure that driving instructors have. You know, you can't work from home, you can't work remotely or switch your provision to remote services. You have to be in an enclosed environment or in close proximity to your clients. So the dual issue here of the fact that that vulnerability that driving instructors have, plus also the fact that whilst COVID-19 is an extreme public health challenge, it's probably the most important public health challenge we're facing right now in the world, we can't disregard other public health risks such as road safety. And if we just suspend driver and rider training indefinitely and don't see it as an essential industry in terms of public health, we will put you further back in the queue than you need to be in terms of making sure that we're still able to train people to go out and do vital jobs in response to COVID-19 and do them safely as well. So that's why I'm raising this issue. I'm not able to have a magic wand. I wish I had. I know sometimes people write to our help desk and to me saying that I should just do something like I have got a magic wand. All I can do is make the business case, rather than just say you should because you just should, make the business cases for our industry in terms of both, can they be considered as a secondary priority group for vaccination, or when will they be considered a group, and are you, Minister, aware of why they should be a group that's considered as a bit of priority in terms of other industries? And also make the case to the Chancellor that because of the fact that we might not be considered a priority and our profession has essentially been switched off and we can't deliver in other ways, and some people still can't access some of the measures that the Chancellor's brought into being, what additional financial support measures can be brought into play for those who are really struggling and can't access either the vaccine or the support measures that are already in place. So, as I said, I can only ask the questions, I can only make the business case, but by raising the issues, by raising the business case, and thinking in terms of ministers and what they need to know about an industry and why they should, give this industry some focus, we hope to make some progress, at least raising our heads above the pulpit on this one, the parapet rather. So Olivia, if we can just move forward, we are going to pause for questions in the meantime. That's why I'm rushing through so we can get to your questions. Testing services have basically been suspended everywhere. In England, all types of driving tests are suspended. Scotland, we have suspension of driving tests because of the temporary lockdown there. Wales and Northern Ireland's actually been suspending its driving testing services for a while. Excuse the typos and the missed words in this. We were just trying to get a presentation together, rather than worrying about whether it was grammatically or aesthetically as accurate as possible. And this includes all practical tests, theory tests, AGI parts 2 and 3 tests, and standards checks. Is there anything to add to that, help desk people who often have their finger on the button of things that are actually happening at the coalface better than I do sometimes?
I don't think so, no. Motorcycle, that obviously includes that as well, doesn't it?
It includes CBT training as well.
CBT, yeah. And vocational as well, I believe.
As far as the fleet situation is concerned, any training at all, which includes fleet training, no one's been given the nod at all to do any fleet training at the moment, especially as the whole thing was all debated in Parliament, I believe either yesterday or Tuesday, which has put this into law now as opposed to being just a regulation. So we are in a situation where we've got to be very careful we don't go jumping at the starting blocks, because if we do for the wrong reasons, we become liable under DVSA's fit and proper, because it is a lot more emphasis on the reasons why we shouldn't do it than we've ever had before.
Yeah, and I just asked DVSA, although they've communicated some stuff to us, and we can see what legislation is due to go through. I've asked for that clear communication on training at this time in terms of enforcement, regulatory enforcement, police enforcement, all those kind of things, because obviously that's what we've been lacking in the first 2 lockdowns. And at the end of the November lockdown, if you remember, if you joined us for the DVSA seminar that we had, webinar, I did say to them, you've had 2 goes at this now. We need to make sure in any future lockdown, God forbid we had one, is what I said at the time, we are very clear that it is a directive not to train, not guidance, not advice, not we very much like you not to, dressed up as must not or should not. Is there an actual legislative directive, and is there going to be enforcement as a result of that? Now, I don't say that for those members of the ADI community who think, I shouldn't be urging an enforcement because they want to try and get out somehow and do some level of training, nor do I say it to undermine, the fact that we should not be training, we should be following the advice. I just want, like many of you do, that absolute clarity on these issues, because it does cause confusion, and it does cause people to knowingly go out there, knowingly in the sense that they know there isn't necessarily the legislation in place to result in a risk for them in terms of enforcement. We anticipate, and Howard's just clarified there, that there will be that legislative imperative this time. And as you can see in the media today, the police are already threatening that they will be stopping people walking down the street to ask them why they're actually walking down the street. And what is their purpose of being out of their homes. That has been the criticism across the board of previous lockdowns, and the suggestion of why they haven't worked is that the enforcement wasn't there and the legislation wasn't there, that and people were able to challenge whether things were enforceable, and still flouted the rules, or lack of rules, as it were. So that's on testing services at the moment. I'll cover key worker critical in a moment in a different slide. Can we forward to the training slide, Olivia? So DVSA has issued guides to driver and rider lessons, including CBT must not take place till restrictions are lifted. This includes the ADI parts 2 and 3 and standards checks as well. So basically, we can't do any training anywhere at this moment in time. There was a fleet company that sent a rather misleading email out to its trainers, I believe, last week or this week, indicating that they still could offer a level of training. We have checked that with DVSA, and they have categorically said this is not the case. This impacts all training at this time. Clearly, this will be reviewed, as we said before, as everything will in terms of this lockdown as time goes on, but that is the status quo that we are facing right now. If you hear of somebody saying, but this is an exemption, or I'm operating under this assumption because I've heard from somebody on Facebook that we're allowed to do this, please do check that with your respective association, DIA or NASP or whoever. So whether, we know for sure, we can tell you at that point, no, that's not the case, or we need to cascade it upwards to DVSA for further clarification and for them to reiterate that message around that training ban as well. Anything to add, folks, on that particular topic at the moment? We can go to some questions in a moment. Okay, just forward one more slide, Olivia. DVSA have stated that key workers should not be trained at this time. I know people are saying, well, hang on a minute, we're in the same level of lockdown as we were back in March, and we were allowed to do some training of key workers then. And we know that key workers are going to be deployed again, or there's going to be demand for new key workers to be driving or going into occupational driving roles as we shut down and delivery demand peaks again for shopping and for other services. Frontline demand also trains for more frontline workers to have to drive and be mobilised in some way, as public transport is not necessarily an option. But at the moment, The only training and testing that will go on at all, if anything, and this will be in a very, very limited way given the risk, will be for blue lights purposes. And that is normally carried out by specialist blue lights trainers, is not for the regular AGI unless they're involved in one of those blue lights. A lot of these organisations also have their own delegated examiners. So, this is not a get out clause for somebody who wants to do some key worker training to say, well, I could do a bit of blue light. That's just not going to happen. And it's going to be severely restricted what's available, and it's going to be on an urgent and essential need, even for those services as well, given that actually a lot of these drivers and riders are already in place from the start and throughout the COVID process. There's been a lot of recruitment had to happen, and there's a lot of individuals that have now got that training experience and had that testing and are out doing their jobs. However, DVSA have said that they will keep this under review as the lockdown progresses. We've written to DVSA and said, if you do think that you're going to allow, as the lockdown prolongs, God knows we hope it won't prolong, but we're all kind of a little bit pessimistic now, I suppose, in our nature, or should we say cynical, and we expect it to last a little bit longer than what the government tells us. Offering that we will switch on the key worker, driver and rider training register and all the associated resources, and have that level of support for people if we are in a situation where key worker training can actually resume again. We have expressed concern to DVSA. It's a really tricky position to be in. We are trying to be respectful and mindful of the very real public health risk of COVID-19 and not exacerbate that in any way. But as a road safety organisation, we always have to keep that in mind as well. So we do have concerns that the absence of any testing and training at all, at a time where you will still see, even though that recruitment's already gone on throughout COVID, there are people in positions now who have been effectively trained and tested, doing their jobs. It's inevitable that we will see people being recruited into driving and riding roles because there's another national lockdown. And we do have a concern that no training and testing whatsoever could lead to some RTAs, because we're allowing people who have never driven in an occupational role before to take on an occupational driving role, which carries more risk anyway in terms of driving, and they'll also be doing it at a time when those roles will be under great pressure as well. So, Mark, I know you've got some real concerns about riders at this moment in time.
Yeah, with CBT training, and for those of you that don't know what CBT is, compulsory basic training, it's valid for 2 years from the date that it's issued. It's a legal requirement to have that for somebody to be able to ride on 125 cc bike with learner plates. A lot of the gig economy is run by people on motorbikes. A lot of our food deliveries, a lot of other stuff, including hospital and blood transport as well, is all done on motorbikes. The risk we have, and this has been very much highlighted to the DVSA, is people just saying, well, actually I still need to earn a living. I need to go out and work. Even if my CBT's run out, I'm going to continue riding without a CBT, which of course is illegal. But how much the enforcement is there, if a lot more enforcement is going on to talk about the COVID stuff, are they still regulating and enforcing the riding of CBT? So yes, it's a massive concern, and the longer this goes on, the more and more people we have to train once we're allowed to do so.
If I can also add there as well, the situation with the first lockdown, pro rata for traffic volume, there were more accidents per mile than in the first lockdown than there was when the lockdown was released. And that was most of those incidents weren't just people driving for work, but it was people driving at higher speeds because they had more space to drive in. That really is quite alarming. It just shows that the behavioural traits, as soon as you give someone an inch, they try and take a mile. And as Carly's been trying to put a case forward that driver training of some guys or other should take place, is those statistics just bear it out.
Yeah, I mean, we had a rise as well. I mean, Highways England reported in the last lockdown, and sadly, I think we'll see that again in the number of LCV accidents and the smaller vans and smaller lorries on the network that people were able to drive on their current license. Because as Howard knows very well, that whilst good companies will train people before they'll put them in an expensive van, creating an expensive risk to life and economy of an RTA, there are always those companies that will dispense with that training. And actually in this crisis, even the good and responsible companies have followed what they believe was the law. We know we can make the argument that it was legislation and that might have caused issues in itself, but they followed the guidance and they haven't even been doing the training, or certainly to the level that they would normally do. So we are seeing, sadly, an occupational driver public health risk emerging as a result of COVID-19. And it is our job as a road safety lobbyist and campaigner to highlight those risks as being important, much as people will raise the risks of not treating cancer patients, you know, in terms of prioritising COVID response and things like that. These all have knock-on effects onto other public health concerns as well. How is anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you've covered that all right, Carly.
Okay, cool. So we will keep you updated on the process with key workers, if that's going to be reinstated in any way. We will keep asking the question like a dogged 5-year-old asking why. We don't do it for those who are really nervous of COVID itself, as we all are, but I know some people are particularly more nervous and worried, and particularly anxious that there's no further exposure, particularly if they are vulnerable health-wise to it, or they have loved ones who are. We're not doing this in a negligent way. We're trying to think of the wider public health risks that we know people will take to the road in new roles, driving for a living, whether they be a doctor who's now got to drive to their place of work or multiple places of work because public transport doesn't work for them anymore, or they are driving a van to make a delivery as increased demand happens for those deliveries. We need to make sure that we're not killing people in other ways, trying to prevent them being harmed by another public health risk. Can we move forward to the next slide?
Can we just do a couple of questions first, Carly, if we may?
That's what this slide's for, Howard.
Well done. Let's go through some of the questions that are driver training related. We'll do the finance ones later. Tracy's asked a question which you've covered I think you've covered already, Carly. Will ADIs be a priority for the vaccine, being we are in such close proximity to our students? Well, answer there, Tracy, as Carly has said, we've asked the question as to why we shouldn't be, but we're waiting for the answer. So that is the answer to that one.
Yeah, I'm making the business, just to be clear, I'm making the business case on that, not in any way undermining any other industry or any other professional and what they do and the impact of what they do, but I'm making the pitch on the basis of yes, the economic impact on the industry, that's really important, but more so the public health risk. If we don't get professional trainers back to doing their job, we're going to create more of a road safety risk as well. So that's why it'd be good to get examiners and trainers back on the road, managing that other public health risk.
Okay, Andrew, his son is 17 very shortly, and he wants to know if he can take his son out on the quiet estates to do training, and also if he can do some training while they go on a central journey for shopping. The answer to that, Andrew, is no, you can't do the training just for the sake of it. If it's a situation where they're able to move the vehicle and keep it ventilated, etc., and you're doing your shopping, perhaps you can put them on there, but you must consider that if your school's marked up as a driving a school car and everyone knows that no training should be taking place, you might get a few photographs and reports sent to people who you don't want reports sent to. We actually had a case of this in November where we have a driving instructor who's now answering to the DVSA over a complaint from a member of the public who thought he shouldn't have been training with our plates on his car. And in fact, we've had a good deal of these. This one in particular has been quite a nasty one because the brilliant complaint that was made against him by a member of the public who thought she had her facts all right and she didn't, and has got this guy in a bit of hot water, although he's actually, as far as I'm concerned, he's clear. But the situation is that the people will put 2 and 2 and make 5 and will think that you should be doing things. So They won't look into the nitty-gritty of the law and see what you can do. We know that the gov.uk has said that on an essential journey, you can take someone if they're in your own household. But if you're going to sit by the side of the road in a marked up car with L plates, that really doesn't cover it. You're putting yourself in a bit of a mucky puddle. You're going to have to ensure that you don't do something that's going to be detrimental to your own business.
Can I just add, there does appear to be some confusion on this because, and this has been caused perhaps by government's own communications, not that that's particularly unusual. In the country restrictions for England on gov.uk, it clearly states you must not provide driving lessons or motorcycle training in England unless it is someone from your household during an essential journey because of the national lockdown. However, at the end of the questions, we say if private practice allowed, government guidance during the lockdown to stay at home with private practice is not advised until the restrictions are listed. So I think, you know, I'd like DVSA to reiterate that message around private practice as well. We have raised this in all the lockdowns actually about the advice around private practice that, you know, whilst we know that private practice is an important part of, you know, kind of getting people to be ready to be independent drivers, we don't want to see it be a default position of parents to use this time for that private practice. You know, there's lots of things that we can't do at the moment, and unfortunately that's got to be one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Howard, you also raised a good point about the marked up vehicles as well, and the points you raised there, because certainly in the first lockdown we were seeing an awful lot of you know, nasty comments on Facebook and social media and things like that against instructors, and yeah, some of it might have been valid, some of it might not be, but you know, people will just put two and two together, certainly members of the public, so it's something, that aspect to consider as well.
Okay, next question we got is from Michelle. How come van drivers can partner up and taxi drivers can still operate? In the fleet market, in some companies, van drivers need to partner up, either because of distances they are travelling, as long as they have the vehicle completely COVID compliant as far as is reasonably practicable. We keep coming back to that saying, which is a thing for the health and safety and occupational safety and health. Some instances, if it is also to do with heavy lifting, that the company still has to ensure that a sole driver does not lift any weights more than between 16 and 20 kilos. Otherwise, it's what's called a two-man lift. So you might find the Argus vehicle going around doing deliveries, etc. There's normally two people in there due to weight. Taxi drivers are able to operate because they tend to be in a situation where the vehicle is pretty much continually moving, and they are a necessity. They are actually regarded as public transport, so they can operate under the Town Planning and Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1968. That is what they're operating under. That is a very small part of the coronavirus regulations, and that's what they come under for them to be able to operate, providing they do it under the guidance of the operating license from their local authority. If the local authority puts curfews on them or anything else, they must comply to those curfews.
I think it comes under the fact that there are exemptions to the restrictions for those providing essential services, and because public transport is seen as a bit of a no-go area for people, you know, getting people to crowd into small spaces to travel together. Taxis are seen as providing that service to allow, you know, individuals to transport at less risk than they would on public transport. Plus, also taxi drivers are playing a role in some authorities to deliver, you know, kind of patients to hospital in what is deemed a less risky way, again, than minibuses and areas where you have to crowd more people in together. Plus, they're dropping off medical supplies to individuals within the community and those kind of runs as well.
And that's one of the reasons why we're lobbying the DVSA and the government to allow us to continue motorcycle training, because it takes all the pressure off of public transport. And you know, on a motorcycle, it's you know, the pure definition of social distancing by its very nature. So it's another reason why we're another angle that we're talking to the DVSA about.
Yeah, in terms of bikes there, Mike, really, Mark, you've got the situation with people being in their leathers and suits and everything else. They are pretty much their own sanitised entity, aren't they?
Correct, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, we wear full PPE before the word PPE got invented.
that's right.
Back in March, nobody had heard of PPE before, except for anybody in the motorcycle industry.
Yeah, and I can't countenance, and I hope this isn't the case, that we don't allow certain areas of training who could be COVID compliant because we think it's unfair on other sectors that they're not allowed to work. We can't make decisions based on, the political gerrymandering of, well, this contingent over here is going to go to Tonto if this contingent over here is allowed to train. If that contingent who is allowed to train is offering a very, very vital service, then in terms of the COVID response, we've got to let them do their job and not worry about what's fair on one group or the other in terms of earning ability or whatever. We're in an emergency situation right now in terms of public health, and these kind of conversations about who gets what and whether it's fair, it is important to the individual, but it's got to be reviewed in the context of the emergency response that we're trying to make right now to this crisis.
Okay, question from John. Can classroom training take place in the COVID compliant rooms with correct social distancing and wearing of face masks? Now, this might be put out to all of us. The only thing I've seen an example of where classroom training is allowed to take place is for online CPC courses. That's the HGV and PCV sector for Certificate of Professional Competence. I haven't seen any other examples allowed by the DVSA. Has anybody else seen any?
I think I would take the lead from the fact that training and education in its entirety has been shut down. We're seeing very little. There is still the question over BTEC and some forms of vocational training. Obviously, the debate is that the education minister has left it to their providers to make the decision about whether they continue with BTEC, which has caused controversy in itself. The education providers would like the government to take a stance on that. The government's saying, is it fair for us to shut down vocational training because it stops people accessing jobs and experience for jobs? But in general, classroom training has shut down unless it's essential. So I think we need to actually get DVSA to clarify on this. And if they can't clarify immediately, they need to take kind of some lead from government and get government to clarify on this issue as well, because we're kind of prophesizing what we think is the answer here, but I'm not entirely sure that we have the answer clearly.
There are some speed awareness and indoors courses being done online. Speed awareness is being done on Zoom, which is probably a bit of a thing, but hey, it is what it is, I guess. Yeah,
but I think physical training, we need that clear directive from DVSA that they can't speak for all areas of vocational training, and there will always be the situation that DVSA says you can't do any classroom training for driver and rider training, but then somebody points out that some plumbing vocational trainer somewhere is doing something. But we need that guidance from our own regulator.
Okay, next one we've got is from Andrew. If an examiner has been vaccinated, could they still run the risk of passing the virus to a candidate who hasn't? I think it depends on if they've had the second vaccination and how long after that second vaccination for them to be completely clear of the virus. To be honest, there is a sort of ebb and flow type thing with the two inoculations at the moment. So there is a risk, I suppose, that could happen, but it is diminished by the second jab. So it isn't impossible, but it is greatly reduced if they have been vaccinated. That's the stance that I understand. Is anyone any different?
Not at this moment in time, but I think these are going to be the challenges that DVSA will be working through, and that obviously individuals will all have to work through in terms of our assessment of risk of the vaccine. It will also depend, other things come into play, like which vaccine you have and the percentage rate of protection that particular vaccine that will give you as well. So this is a watch this space in terms of further information on that as it emerges, what policy will be, what protection it offers, and all of those kind of things as well.
Okay, a question from Kevin. I have seen the army trainers out in my local area who are civilian trainers, ? Yes, you will do, Kevin, because the Ministry of Defence, if they have anybody who is doing any work for them, what they call them, designated trainers, designated examiners, they are still allowed to train for the defence of the realm. That's allowed to happen.
We've had Adrian says, I work for Drive Tech. They are continuing to train. And I think we've said we are still waiting for some clarification on that, as I understand it.
I don't want to say it's that brand, but that may be the brand in question that sent an email to their trainers advising that they would still be training. That email, not that I'm saying it came from Drive Tech, because actually it wasn't, I didn't see who it came from, it was forwarded to us anonymously. That email has been forwarded to DVSA, and the clarification has come back from DVSA that no training should be taking place unless Drive Tech are training one of the designated occupations that is still allowed to be trained because they're making a response to COVID, i.e. blue lights training, as Howard said, if they're involved in any level of defence training or anything to do with the vaccine rollout in terms of mobilising that. So I would be interested, and I actually think it's in the interest of the fleet trainer that they state to their trainers why they are continuing to train at this time. Clearly, we are involved in fleet training internationally and testing, and we've made a decision to halt that at this moment in time unless we're asked to specifically do something that is exempted. So I think, you know, the DVSA have said that their position is no fleet training should be taking place, and there's no exemptions as far as they're concerned with these companies. So if the provider who is spreading this message can clarify what the justification is for telling their trainers this and continue to training, it'd be in their interest to clarify that so we all know, and to, you know, to defend their position.
So Fiona has asked, can we ask DVSA to allow instructors to resume training before the test centres when they reopen? And the previous 2 lockdowns, training, examining start dates have been pretty much simultaneous. So that is a very good question.
Yeah, actually, really good timing as well, Fiona, was it? Because that is, I'm doing a bit of a saving myself time, saving them time email where I'm asking Nadine Zahawi, Rishi Sunak and Matt Hancock in the same email about vaccinations and financial support, and then I'll send it all to the individuals in specifics. And one of the things I meant to put in there was look, if you can't achieve any of those things for us, could you at least look at what we keep asking DVSA for, which is that we've asked every single lockdown, can we have that unlocking in a COVID compliant manner before testing resumes in at least 2 to 3 weeks? So again, we don't create that public health risk of people who are not prepared for the job of being on the road, either being as an occupational driver or as a newly licensed novice driver, and the risk they present. So we're trying to negate that public health risk. We're not just trying to get everybody back to work and earning, which is obviously a consideration, but the preeminent justification behind making that demand is to make sure that if people are going for test, there is an adequate period of training that can happen before that as well. We can't ignore training is a prerequisite for testing, and the reasons why that is and why it's so important. And unfortunately, during this lockdown, it looks like we are ignoring it. It looks like we're saying testing can carry on in some degrees and we can have testing, but we won't really support training to the degree that we should. As an agency, your message should be clear, and has been clear on other occasions, around the need to train people adequately before they go to a test centre, vocational, bike or otherwise. We need to back that up in this crisis, because there is real public health risks if we don't do that.
We also had the issue before, coming out of the last 2 lockdowns, where DVSA had to get the test centres back up in to a healthy state as well. So we know that it was things like, Legionnaire's disease and things like that they had to test for, making sure the water is running and all of those checks. And so that's something which hopefully we can again ask the DVSA to see if they're going to deal with that a little bit earlier this time, perhaps.
Not only that, the landlord situation as well.
Well, it's the landlords. Obviously, they won't have where they have access to their own properties, but where they don't have the access and the landlords are there, we understand that they've got greater restrictions there. But that's a key question also that Fiona asked, to see whether DVSA, what plans that they've got where they can access their properties, where they've not got additional barriers for themselves to get in, because we know that they do, and that created some of the issues, and that's beyond their control. But that would be something as well that we could ask the DVSA perhaps as well.
And please bear in mind that DVSA want to go back to work, and they do.
Yeah.
This is their worst nightmare. It's your worst nightmare, it's our worst nightmare, but this is also their worst nightmare. Having another lockdown when they weren't even up to speed after the others as well. In the tier 4, tier tier 4 discussions before Christmas, you know, it was, people said, well, we didn't get to know about what was happening till very late, and it was atrocious. One of the reasons that was is because DVSA was fighting damn hard to make sure that training could still go on under tier 4 conditions in some respects, to not have to, testing, to not have to shut that down. And even in tier 3 as well, they were fighting that battle. So I know that they would wish to get testing up and running as soon as they safely can. And I know they do see the argument for unlocking ADIs and motorcycle trainers before the training. It's just getting that message, you know, recognised and supported at the decision-making level of the ministers, who will, you know, pass down judgment on these things. Next question.
Okay, Mark has asked, as a driving therapist, many of my clients are full licence holders and need additional support. Is there any scope to assist on this basis?
Yes, we can have a look at what we can do to support them. I know in, I think it was PMQs yesterday, well, not PMQs, but the question session around the coronavirus legislation, that an MP did raise the very real issue that disabled people, hidden and physical disabilities, seem to have had a lot of their needs ignored in this lockdown, or haven't been properly consulted about how a lockdown impacts the services that they need to have independence and survive in some instances. So we do need to make these considerations for people who, you know, need extra support, not just with their driving, but with their life as a whole. So I think we will need to bring that back and talk to DVSA and make sure those considerations are being made for those types of pupils. If the ADI who asked that question, could they ping me an email with their suggestions about how that support may be offered? I'm not saying I'm completely ignorant, but I'd actually rather somebody at the coalface guided what our suggestions would be to DVSA and what we can be doing as an industry to support those individuals as well. My email address is Carly Brookfield, C-A-R-L-Y, brookfield@driving.org. Normally I'd say email me about whatever you want to do with your professional career. Just be bearing in mind at the moment that the inbox is overflowing somewhat, and I might not be very quick to respond. So I'd like us to keep it to essential questions for me only, and everything else through the help desk.
Okay, so Emma's asked, the DVSA are rescheduling driving tests early in February when we'll still be in lockdown. Will the DVSA put tests on hold like they did within lockdown 1?
Again, I think that's one of the things to add to the FAQs. We could attempt an answer right now, but I want it from the horse's mouth so I don't give out the wrong advice. So can we add that to the on a daily basis? DIA and working with NASP sends up a load of FAQs to DVSA so we get the right answers. I know people attempt answers all over the place, but we're just anxious to get the from the horse's mouth response on these things rather than answer them straight away.
Okay, so Emma's asked, I am in priority group 4 and so I'll get the vaccine before I go back to lessons. Will I be able to work more like I did before lockdown 1 rather than doing fewer and shorter lessons? Is it expected for both trainer and learner to be vaccinated before this happens? I mean, obviously we know that there is a priority order in terms of getting the vaccine. We know that the government, the new Oxford vaccine has been rolled out to GP surgeries. I think the aim is it 2 million a week? They're trying to, that's the aim, the target the government are trying to aim for. In terms of, you know, so Emma's, you know, confident she'll get vaccinated before going back to work. But it's, I think your question was more in terms of how you are going to operate. So, you know, whether you can go back to almost operating normally or whether you're going to still have to put those COVID compliant measures in place. Tricky one. I would say, I think you still need to have some of those control measures in place. The vaccines are mostly reliable. They're not 100%. So I think it'd be wise to continue to, you know, have the ventilation, have that cleaning regime like you've been doing anyway. That would be my response to that.
Can I just interject there? I think, and this is a strong message from me. the liability and the management of risk has to come down to the individual. We can't just expect regulators to make those decisions for us. I'm not suggesting the ADI who's asked this question is doing that, and anybody on this call is saying that, but we have to make decisions to manage our own risk. And what has been good about the COVID-19 crisis, rare that it may be that anybody says anything's been good about this crisis, is it has created a high awareness of risk in the training process, that people might have not have realized the many more elements of risk in their job, you know, previous to COVID-19 in terms of infection risk. So I think all the COVID safe measures that people are taking now are to be considered as your default position in training moving forward, because there are always other viruses that and illnesses that you could be exposed to and could be a risk, even if it's not a risk to your pupil. Even if you just think very selfishly for a moment here, and to be honest, we have to be selfish as individuals to actually help protect other people. If we were ill with a virus of any kind, or flu or colds or anything like that, it stops us from being able to work. And not in your industry, in the kind of hand-to-mouth existence to some degree that the driver training exists in, it stops you being able to earn that living. So I think, you know, it's that tricky balance moving forward of continuing to have those COVID safe measures in place, because they're infection, you know, risk management, and they should be there anyway, A, to protect you, and B, because you're providing a service for a fee, and you're supposed to be providing something that's as safe as possible for the person you're providing it to. But there's the pragmatic approach of, you know, some of the measures are things like space your pupils don't have as many a day. So pragmatically, how do you do that and also achieve the level of income that you need to get back to some level of financial stability as well? So those will come down to very individual decisions to be made. Don't necessarily expect that guidance at all from the regulator, and not necessarily is it our remit to tell people what to do. I think it would just be our advice that you would continue with infection control measures from here to eternity to a large degree to protect yourself and your customers. But some of them, like the spacing of pupils, like the number of pupils, you're going to have to consider risks versus income and those tricky decisions as well. I think more advice, and it will be advice rather than diktats, will emerge as we know more about the vaccine and its effectiveness.
Yeah, exactly. Just going through a couple more. Are we still carrying on some questions for now?
Yeah, I'm happy
to. Okay. Collins asked, can I ask why generally face masks have not been made compulsory on driving lessons since the crisis began in March?
Well, Colin, I pretty much support you on that one. Yeah. This is a personal view of mine. I spend quite a bit of time in Spain and in England as well. The Spanish have adopted mandatory face masks in the streets. I've just come back from there a few weeks ago. And I didn't know what to do when I went back on the streets, in terms of I'd been wearing a face mask the moment I stepped outside the door in all settings for a few days. And then, you know, you're back in the UK and nobody's wearing them in shops even sometimes. And when you've got a real risk like you have in close proximity situations such as in vehicle training, you know, if we can do anything to cut that risk, we should be doing it. And if people don't willingly take the measures to protect themselves, the pupils and the wider public, then sometimes there has to be a mandatory process to do that. We can have a long debate about civil rights and the effectiveness of masks and things like that, but there is sufficient evidence to say that they are a key mitigant. And the situation that we're in, we have to take every mitigant we can to get ourselves out of this situation. It's in some respects, it's short-term pain for long-term gain as well. We can, the amount of time and energy we put into not doing something, we could just do it and comply and get out of this crisis, or we could spend our time arguing about it. Now, those who've got a real reason not to wear one because of trauma, because of health issues and all those, absolutely respect that. And there are exemptions for those people who have those genuine issues. Scotland has made them mandatory. There is a discussion in England and Wales as to whether they will be made mandatory. It is unfortunately a process. Even if DVSA says tomorrow, actually we think they should be made mandatory, it's getting that through as a regulatory or legislative imperative as well. And we can say, well, Scotland managed it. Scotland benefits from a level of agility sometimes that we don't necessarily have in other parts of the UK.
Do we know what's happening in terms of PDI badge holders with extensions? because we know that that wasn't allowed before, because it was
I think
legislation.
NHS are going to be asking for that to be reviewed again, because whilst we might not have supported it, we understood the rationale from previous lockdowns, because I think we all thought it wasn't going to happen for very much longer, and we thought, well, we'll just suck it up and see, you know, and deal with it, in the hope that we won't have to go through the situation again. And the same applies to theory test certificates. We're now in our third lockdown. We didn't accept, we didn't necessarily support, but we had to take on board the feedback from, not DVSA really, because they also were, you know, putting up requests for these things to be considered. They weren't just saying no, they were saying, we're going to put that to the minister, we do support it to some degree, but then they have to come back to us and say, this is the reason that we've been given and we have to comply with that. You know, I think we've gone beyond that point now, that things like theory test certificates and PDI certificates can't be renewed because it might cause a road safety risk with inexperienced people still being able to go on and ply their trade or get a driving license, and they haven't had the necessary assessments that they should have done. I think we've got to be pragmatic about where we are now in a third lockdown, the amount of time that we've been locked down. And, you know, it's the 80-20 rule, is the 80 bit, the risk of people not, you know, not being able to continue and not being able to progress, you know, more than the relatively small risk of somebody creating a road risk if they, you know, haven't recently done their assessments. So we will be strongly advocating that the issue of theory test certificates being extended is revisited. I have also written, so NASP has written to DVSA this morning on that issue. And that's with the NASP chair. I'm not the NASP chair anymore. We do it in a 6-month rotation, so it's now MSA, but we're all in it together. So we're asking the question about the extension of theory test certificates. We'll ask the question about PDIs as well. I've also suggested to, or asked DVSA, why we can't now move with theory testing to an online provision. You know, DVSA were thinking about this before COVID. About doing it, that we've had lots of presentations for some very enthusiastic people who want to drag DVSA's services kicking and screaming into the digital age, and I know a lot of staff at DVSA want to see that happen. That doesn't necessarily need to stop, and one would argue becomes more imperative given this ongoing crisis. You know, if we'd had that in place before this crisis, we'd have been able to continue with a lot more stuff than we have. It's not, COVID cannot become an excuse not to do something, particularly if it solves a problem of COVID. So I've written to this morning to say, you talked about being able to go online with testing and people to be able to do it from their own homes in the future. Surely this is the point at which we can expedite this. Digital solutions are far easier and quicker to engineer than perhaps government agencies ever giving you the impression that they are. We, as an international testing body, have looked at introducing something called online proctoring, which allows you to give a wider element of security to the testing process, i.e. to make sure that people can't cheat. So the technology is there now in lots of vocational testing areas to make sure people can't cheat a system if they're doing it from home. And you know, we lag behind in this sector, other areas of education in harnessing digital resources, and this is in one in which we need to get our act together as a sector. So I have said, Pearson VUE provides an online proctoring product. It's there, it's available, they're offering it to customers. I don't care what the contract is that you have with them currently. We've got to look at these solutions now and how they can be brought to bear on this situation. So if we can't extend the theory test certificates, and very much we're piling pressure on for that to happen, whatever the excuse that comes back from ministers about road safety concerns, okay, so we can't do that, it's a definite no. Come on guys, consider this solution, because it's there. You might have to spend a bit of money to do it, but there are other areas of education that have realised that that's an investment they need to make right now. And if there is a solution, there's going to be even more cries as time goes on, as we educate people that solution exists, as to why you're not focused on getting this solution on board. Because it's not just for now in reaction to this crisis, it's future-proofing, you know, the theory test process moving forward. All its delivery is digital, yet it's still done in physical locations. So even not just making an argument for COVID here, it's a fairly antiquated way now, and it's becoming more antiquated, of delivering online assessments in a physical location that costs money in terms of people, resources, physical location, all those kind of things as well. Sorry, that's my little rant over about theory tests.
So Alan has asked, can consideration be made for putting tests back in date order, i.e. put everyone back for 3 months, so assuming reopening in April, a big if, then January test be put back to February test put to May, March back to June. I know that we've had this conversation with DVSA and I can't remember the numbers now, but there were so many more hundreds of thousands of candidates that had test books. They weren't going to be affected with the last November lockdown, because this question was asked quite a few times. And in order to uproot that many people, it just didn't make sense. And also, it's where's the sort of fairness on those guys as well. So I can't see that happening at all.
The DVSA just physically don't have enough resource to be able to do that.
It's not possible that they can do that.
No.
It's massively frustrating. We know that, and we know that some poor candidates have been moved countless times, but they're not going to uproot tests which are or will be unaffected in order to accommodate the ones that will, because the numbers are greater.
Believe you me, I'm not DVSA's PR person, but I do have to be fair in this. They constantly review what they're offering and how they offer it. And I know the people that we liaise with certainly are open-minded to take other solutions. So, I know they will take it back to decision makers. So I know my email this morning will be taken to decision makers, and I'll get an answer whether it's no, we can't possibly consider that route now, or yes, it's something that we're working on. So any ideas, any solutions, bring them to us, because not one person has got all the answers, and certainly don't always, having worked in government agencies, working in big businesses and small businesses, the organisation in question has not always got the answers, and sometimes a blinding flash of inspiration and solution can come from an external party. So if anybody has that blinding flash of, don't be afraid or think it's too obvious, they've obviously already considered it, or they're not going to listen to me. Send it to one of us, and if we think it's a great idea, we'll put it forward. I know that the teams are reviewing and are taking apart the process, theoretically, and thinking about how they can best do it. They don't want this backlog. They don't want to be unfair to customers all the time. They may default to the options that they've defaulted to previously because of the pressures that they're under and their resource availability, but they are looking each time to review that process and see whether there is anything at all, even the smallest tweak they can do to make it better for the customer and for them as well.
In motorcycle training, all of the trainer booking is all and vocational, and the DVSA have put that back on the approved training bodies to allocate their tests in the way they see fit. So within motorcycle training, we can actually do what they've suggested, whether that's what we want to do or not. But the DVSA have already said, it's up to us to allocate the tests to the people in the order we want to allocate them to. And a number of ATBs have done exactly what that has been asked. There is just pick everything up and move it. Some people have done it the opposite way around. Some have prioritised key workers. Obviously, we can't do anything until training recommences.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I mean, again, the one good thing of COVID will be hopefully the lessons that we learn about how some systems are no longer fit for purpose in the situation that we train in now, the world that we train in now. So, considerations like, do you need physical test centres for theory tests? Do you need physical test centres for practical tests, or should people be deployed, on a remote basis because that's more flexible provision? Should we have more flexibility in terms of examiner availability? A workforce of contingency part-time examiners who can come in when we haven't got enough full-time. All of these are solutions that DVSA is considering, and we ask them to consider on a regular basis pre-COVID, because it wasn't a perfect science how their services were offered before we went into this crisis, and it's certainly been challenged to the point that it's fallen over in many respects during this crisis, as have a lot of government agencies' provision.
Do we know if DVSA are rescheduling tests week by week like they've done in the past? Emma's asking, until the lockdown ends.
I'm going to ask DVSA for, look, they're dealing with the lockdowns happened, and what we've got to stop happening right now, what messages we've got to send out about what stops. What they'll be doing immediately after that is the start. How do we do the start and the restart. So that clarity will come out over the next few days, hopefully. And it's a question that will be asked at every single meeting that we have with them, which are regular of them and the team. And the team goes back and faithfully asks these questions and tries to get us the update. So yeah, that will be the big question is, okay, we've had the stop, and let's have a bit more clarity on what the stop actually means, as in enforceable, what the risk for people who do continue training for whatever reason. But now, what is the start? What is the way out of this? And how's that going to work?
Yeah. Steve has said, sorry, I missed the answer on full licence holders and fleet. Can bus and PSV training carry on?
I can answer that one for you. With the buses, bus companies that have designated and delegated trainers and examiners, they are able at this moment, and that might change, but at the moment they're able to do training because the government has given all local authority areas mileage quotas to meet in order for urban and out of town services to continue, to make sure that even the non-profitable routes still keep going during the COVID times for people to be able to get to and from work. So in terms of bus companies, yes, they are currently allowed to still do training. But in terms of independent trainers who do LGV and do PCV, at the moment, they come under the same as everybody else. No training allowed to take place. Full license holders can't do it either. Same as the motorbikes can't. So everyone's grounded on that front. It's only the commercial bus companies that are able to do so.
Okay.
Any more pressing questions on the testing and training side of things?
We've gone through the questions that we've got so far.
Okay, we've got another any questions slide in a moment. I'm just going to tab on to the final, because I can see some questions coming up about this one as well. So tab on to the next slide, Olivia.
Yeah.
So I've got the team to dig out all the financial support information that we had from the last lockdowns and update that. So they're in the process of doing that at the moment. I can see some specific questions coming in on there about the forced support grant, the SIDE, Self-Employment Income Support Scheme. There will be a fourth grant available, which covers the, so it's currently open for the third round of grants. And that's covering the 3-month period of November 2020 to January 2021. And applications for the third round of the size must be made on or before the 29th of January 2021. The months of February to April 2021, not that we're saying we're going to be in lockdown until April, it's just we know the government knows the impact, the Treasury knows the impact is going to go into April at the very least. That's going to be covered under a fourth grant of the scheme. The third grant is worth 80% of average monthly trading profits, and that's capped at £7,500 in total. I'm not sure, and I'm just scanning through now, that the full detail of the fourth grant is available yet. I would warn it will be less than 70%. I'm pretty much sure that's going to be the case. But I'm not sure of the dates that you can apply for it yet. I know the period it will cover, as I said, February to April, but we don't know what the amounts will be and when that will open for applications, but I'm sure that detail will come out very, very shortly. In that specific advice on financial matters, we'll include the latest updates on the size, we'll include the latest updates on things like the bounce back loans. There's obviously some other streams of funding, smaller pots admittedly, but worth investigating for people around things like grants that are made by local authorities mainly if you have to self-isolate because you've identified that you have COVID, or track and trace has identified that you've been exposed to COVID. So there is some support, but delivered, I think, on a local authority basis for people in that situation. Again, it's not very much, but it's better in your pocket and helping you in your situation. I believe that Universal Credit is still open. They haven't, they've put off altering the floor on Universal Credit until the springtime. So it will allow more self-employed people to still tap into that. So our advice at the moment is, have a look at that advice that comes through from us. There's very many other sources of advice out there. Money Saving Expert website is absolutely excellent. I've worked in financial services for a very long time now, and one of my roles as a communications and marketing director was trying to relay complex financial information into layman's terms so we all understood it and could make sensible decisions about our finances. And that's why I'm a real advocate of that site. I don't get any payment for it. I just think it's a really useful site, and their whole raison d'etre is to get advice to people in a way that's understandable and accurate. So, you know, check that site because it has got a lot of advice for small businesses and the self-employed on there. And obviously Martin Lewis is a great advocate and campaigner for small businesses. The kind of general advice that we're giving people is, you know, look at the sources of funding and support that are out there. And if you're eligible, tap into them. I know that seems strange, but from time to time, we'll deal with people on the help desk who will say they're in a terrible position financially. And then when we run through the measures, A, they might not be aware of them, and that's one thing. B, they're aware of them, but they don't want to tap into them for some personal reasons. They don't, for example, they don't like the bounce back loans because they don't like debt. We're in a situation now financially as a country and as individuals where debt is not necessarily a choice, it's a necessity. And if you can access debt, and I'm not counseling people to go out there and get as much debt as possible, but if you can access debt that is cheap and risk-free in a huge degree for you as an individual, try not to be too afraid of it to the point it prevents you getting help. The bounce back loan is a government-backed security. You don't have to provide security yourself. You have a year's break before you have to make any repayments. Even then, the repayments are one of the lowest rate of interest that I think you'll find. And you can have payment breaks and payment holidays during what is now a 10-year term to repay that loan. And we've had people who said to me, I'm uncomfortable about taking that debt on board, but at the same time, they're accruing debt in other ways or exposing themselves to financial penury by being a little bit afraid of this. Now, I know there's huge problems with accessing those bounce back loans, given it's limited to banks that will give you a business account, or if you already have an existing bank account with them. But, you know, really, and similarly, people have said to me they don't want to access universal credit for, again, another personal reason, or it's nothing, so why should I bother? It's a lot of effort for nothing. If means of support are available to you and you can access them, at this third round of national lockdown, nobody's finances are looking great. So I would seriously consider these options if you haven't considered them before, and for why they exist in the first place, to help you get out of that position. So, you know, we'll send the information. Again, it's about individual responsibility in terms of following up on that and considering what it is for you. I get that there are many people who fall outside of these measures, and that is unfair. The government will argue they've done a huge amount, more than any country probably in the world, to support you know, business and to support the individual throughout this crisis. But we know people fall out of it. So that is why I'm going back to the Chancellor again. I am one voice amongst many trade industry, you know, representative amongst many industries who asks this question, to see whether there is, you know, a way that we can support the individual driver trainer who can't access size, can't access you know, business bounce back loans, can't access universal credit, and has nowhere else to go in terms of funding. Is there some kind of specific measure that can be made for those people? So, you know, watch this space on that. We've seen that leisure and hospitality and retail have been offered another £9,000 grant this week to help them. And many of you would argue, well, haven't they already had a lot of support? And I am pointing that out in my letter to the Chancellor. What I'm also pointing out to them is that whilst beauticians, restaurants and pubs are important to our economy, and no offence to those of you who have loved ones working in those sectors, and they are important to our cultural life and our well-being as well, you know, we do need to consider that driver trainers and rider trainers do a very important job in terms of they're not just teaching 17-year-olds to drive so they can get out and go down to the McDonald's drive-through with all their mates. We're teaching people to drive to work who are doctors and nurses. We're keeping goods on the road. We're getting blood on bikes to hospitals who need it, and other medical supplies as well. There's a lot of training that goes on that is for a very important purpose, and we need to make sure that industry is still able to operate post this crisis, and that we haven't got any professional trainers, you know, who are in such financial penury they're not able to offer that essential service anymore. So I'm going to make that impassioned plea on that basis more so than anything else. So we'll write to the Chancellor. We're going to send you as much financial advice as we can. We will investigate your queries about, you know, support in terms of if you can't get into the size bounce back loans, all those kind of things, or, you know, if you've got queries about how they work and your eligibility. We are also speaking to individual members and offering advice and mediating where we can on behalf of groups of ADIs or individual ADIs with people like the franchises, leasing companies and people like that, because there are some franchises have acted in a very responsive manner in terms of their ADIs, and there are some that have done the best that they can given the business situation they're in, even if their ADIs don't feel it's been the best package. And then there are those that aren't helping their ADIs at all. So we're looking to compile some specific advice to franchisees as well. I have been talking to the managing directors and chief executives of those franchises, especially in extreme hardship cases, for that individual, but also as a representative case of what their people at the coalface are suffering. So do come to us with those issues. We can't wave a magic wand, but if we know about them, there may be a way in which we can help you rather than feeling you have to battle on your own with those. A hardship fund has been launched by the industry for the industry this week. More details will be coming out in the next couple of days about that. Some very admirable ADIs, a couple of ladies have launched this fund. You'll have seen it talked about on Facebook. It's 2 ADIs who've taken it on off their own back to help the industry. Over £20,000 has been raised by this hardship fund. DIA is making a financial contribution, plus we're contributing resources and support to promote the fund. We'll probably make other financial contributions as time goes on to help it. I know Young Marmalade in particular has given over £10,000 to funds so far. I'll also be going out to all our advertisers and supporters and asking them if they can, as commercial organisations, support the fund as well. We're assisting the 2 ladies who set it up, who have got some experience of charitable backgrounds themselves, and so have I as an appeals manager for a national fund, and also I'm a board member of a number of charities. So we're going to form a panel in the industry to help get those grants out to people, because it's important to raise the money, but then it's important to make sure that the money is distributed fairly as well. So what these grants will take the form of is a £500 or up to £500, not always £500, but a grant of a one-off nature to those ADIs who are in extreme kind of hardship financially at the moment. And the panel's job will be to make sure it goes to the most in need as well. I wish it was the case, and my experience of working in the charitable sector unfortunately says not, that every application for hardship funding is always genuine, and that's why we wanted to establish this panel to make sure that it's going to the right people who are genuinely in need. We have been appraised by members as well of other hardship funds. I believe there's one being set up for members of the Muslim community who are suffering financially. So a number of Muslim community organisations have raised funding specifically for people in their community who own businesses facing hardship. So what we'll do is, if you know of something that is designed to help people in your community or in your profession, please let us know about that so we can decide what level of support we can give as DIA, but also we will always promote that fund as well. So that's that on the Hardship Fund, and more information coming on that shortly. Is there any questions that people are flagging immediately on the financial side of things that you think we need to address now that won't be addressed in the advice that we send out shortly?
Just going back through the questions. I mean, Mark has said, as a company director, I've very little coming in, young children, a young family to support, got no desire to flout the rules, but is there any, if there is any scope to get out sooner, obviously it'd be very helpful. Obviously, yeah, more of a comment rather than a question. I mean,
I completely empathise with the situation of people who are in that. You know, people make the very trite assumption, well, if you're a limited company, you know, you're earning too much, so why should the government help you out? That's not necessarily the case, and some people are advised to go the limited route by their accountants, and maybe it's not necessarily the best choice for them as a business, but it's been a default position for a while for some small businesses that sometimes slaps people in the face. These people aren't awash with profits just because they're able to get to that limited company status. And a lot of times you're leaving the profits in the company because it needs to be invested in for it to continue to flourish and grow as well. So I think, you know, the government does recognise that, and that's why they did bring in the bounce back loans scheme, in that they knew people fell outside of it, and for very genuine reasons. They do want to continue business, enterprise, being able to survive and then go on to grow again after this issue. But there is a strong argument to say that the measures haven't gone far enough for some sectors, and some sectors feel ignored by this bailout package. So we do have to keep raising that issue and shining a spotlight on why driver and rider trainers, particularly, might feel they need some more support.
Company directors, is there any update on that from last time, because many can't access funds?
I think that falls into the what I've just spoken about there, that anybody who's a limited company owner has no support at all from the size scheme. But they're still in a penurious position, that they're having to pay out salaries in some instances and all the other costs, and they haven't got that income coming in and they can't access the funding. Obviously, the bounce back loan and the small business interruption loan are options. Small business interruption loan, though, really is only an option for larger small businesses, given that it kicks in at £50,000, and most people aren't going to be wanting the liability of £50,000 and aren't eligible for it, because it's a percentage of your turnover or your trading profits. Bounce back loans, however, again, it comes down to things like individual choice. Some people don't want to take on the added liability of debt. However, it is cheap and easily serviceable debt in some respects. A £5,000 loan would equate to you paying back about £60 a month after a year of not paying anything back at all. Given the percentage of the APR on that, there's no security risk for you to have that loan. If you took out £10,000 of bounce back loan, you'd be paying around £97 a month in a year's time. Plus, you can have payment breaks and pay it, kind of the amount only without interest breaks as well. However, they're not for everybody, and not everybody can access them. Some people have problems with credit, and that's been an issue for them. Some people are banking with a bank that doesn't offer the scheme, and either they can't access a new business account with the banks offering it, or they don't want to shift. Now, that is an individual choice. So I did have somebody emailing our help desk. We kept saying that it's an individual choice and you do need to change to other banks, and there are options, but they did keep saying, I don't want to change bank. That's an individual choice. We can't do anything about that. But there are people who cannot genuinely countenance having a bounce back loan or access them. And that's the group of people that we're talking about. We need to see whether there's other sources of support that are available to those people as well. We've got to be careful as well, however. I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound negative, so please excuse me, but I have to speak my truth, as it were. We do see some chat about people saying they can't access things and it's completely unfair. Yet some of these individuals, when I've spoken to them one-on-one, have disclosed the reasons that they can't access this scheme in a way that they're not disclosing on online forums when they're saying it's unfair, i.e. they are, people who earn more than 50% of their income from other means that haven't been particularly affected by coronavirus. These are incomes that are still coming into them. They're not full-time, allegedly, in driving instruction, so 50% of their earnings allegedly aren't coming from driving instruction. They have it from other sources. Or they want to access universal credit, but they have a large, very large in some instances, cache of savings, which disqualifies them for that. We are where we are with this. We can only offer support as a nation, because we all pay for it somehow, to those most in need who cannot access any other level of income. So, we've got to help those most in need. And that's why this hardship fund has to be managed carefully in terms of a panel of people who have the experience to know what is, a genuine application for need. And I think, on some of these issues as well, we'll see people trashing these schemes and saying they're useless and they couldn't access them. Some genuinely couldn't for genuine reasons. Some maybe being a bit economical with the truth about why they couldn't access them. And that's not a lot of people, but that has happened. And then we see them go on online saying, nobody's helping me. They might have a bit more help than they're maybe giving out. Sorry to say that, but we need to be truthful about these situations.
Would you like to move on to the next one, Colin?
Yes. So I think that's a really important subject, financial support and advice, and it impacts on the next slide. Clearly, this is a challenging time for everybody. People might think that they are generally in good mental health. And mental health has become a big discussion topic, as it should be. I have family members with bipolar. I have family members who are mental health professionals. I've suffered mental health challenges in my life as well, and as many people. But a lot of people have never faced a mental health challenge in their life before, and COVID has really, really challenged, you know, the majority of the population in terms of their mental health in one way or the other. And I don't want to see, from my own experiences, from experiences of family members and friends and people who have gone through it before and are going through it again now, I don't want to see anybody suffer in silence. So if you are in need of support, obviously we're not professionals in this respect. And I think it can be a little bit reckless for organisations who are not professionals in this sense to hold out that they are, or they have, you know, a volunteer army that can do it unless they're specifically trained. But we can be a source of support in referring you on to sources of advice and support for mental health issues. So I wouldn't put us out there as your helpline for mental health issues. However, if 5 minutes talking to one of us on the phone can help you, we are there for that. Don't be offended if we do refer you on, though, because it's about being responsible with the level of advice that we can give to best support you. So the services that can offer support are out there and have ramped up their support during the COVID crisis. Mind is an excellent organisation, very underfunded, you know, and is trying to do the best with what they've got and service as many people, which is growing every day, as possible. But they've got some brilliant advice on their website right now. Excuse me that I haven't got the full HTTP www address on there that you can click through, but it was doing strange things to the PowerPoint when I was hastily putting it together. So have a look at Mind's tips and well-being and their advice and what other advice they can offer. The NHS has written some great resources about staying at home and how that can impact our mental health, as well as other financial worries and everything else, and what you can do to help manage those. Nhs Volunteer Responders, which is the service set up in response to COVID-19 to help people who are vulnerable in particular or fell into shielding groups, has some volunteers who are specifically focused on mental health support. There is an eligibility criteria to use this service, but if you do, for example, fall into a shielding or isolating group or one of the vulnerable groups by age or health issues, you may be able to tap into the volunteer responders who are working on mental health issues as well. I'd say on that one as well, the NHS Volunteer Service is looking for more volunteers at the moment. I'm not suggesting for one moment that just because you're locked down, you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs and looking for something to do. There's something you'd look to do. It's probably earning some money, not necessarily volunteering. However, they are looking for more volunteers to help with that service. So if you think you can contribute something to it, or you think you need that service, check out their website because there's a lot of useful information on there. In certain regions, a free online cognitive behavioural therapy programme is being run in partnership with the NHS. CBT is widely used for people who have mental health challenges. It's widely used because it can be very successful with people. And normally it would be given as a talking therapy with a one-on-one therapist. And you can tap into that if your GP does refer you for that via the NHS. But it's difficult to get that referral at this moment in time, and services are pressed for that one-on-one support. So the NHS has delivered a online program, which nobody is saying is exactly the same as working one-on-one with a therapist, but it is deemed to be of use to people going through some mental health challenges at the moment. So it may be worth, you know, going through that program if it's available in your area. I know it's available in the South East through NHS partnerships there, and I think, Olivia, when we looked into it, there's more and more trusts offering this service as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. So have a little look online. Do make sure you have a little look at your local trust and see what they've got to offer. As you say, don't suffer in silence, because we pick up a lot of calls on the help desk. People are in a very bad way, and we will spend the time and we will talk to you, because we don't leave anyone like that. But obviously we are not trained professionals in this, so we will signpost you on to other people. But in the meantime, be proactive. If you feel that you might need these services, have the number, or you might look them up anyway for somebody who who might also be suffering. So very important to do that and look after yourselves at the moment.
There's no shame in not feeling happy 100% of the time, you know, and this would be in normal times, because we all have individual circumstances that challenge us. I'm a mental health advocate. I will talk freely about the things that took me to the places that I've had to go to in mental health. My sister is clearly a diagnosed bipolar, kind of person, and that comes with its own set of challenges. So I probably have a more acute awareness of this, and people in our audience today who have relatives with mental health issues will understand this a little bit better. But I also see it on a professional level in COVID, that's really sharpened the focus on the need to provide more mental health support to the sector, because even in normal times, it's an isolated profession and people struggle with that. We're very lucky in our team that we have a team and we can talk to each other, but not everybody has that support network as an AGI or rider trainer. But particularly we do deal with, not something we necessarily talk about all the time in any detail, but if somebody's undergoing an investigation by the fraud and integrity team for misconduct or fraud or anything like that, or somebody's been removed from the register and we're going through an appeals process, that takes a huge mental health toll on somebody. And actually, whilst the majority of our time should be spent on building the case and getting them out of that situation, we actually do quite a lot of metaphorical hand-holding with people as well. And that's caused us to look at what else can we do, from the training of our people to being able to signpost to services that are included in levels of membership as well. And I'm not plugging any of our new services, but we do have a new version of Plus coming out soon, and it is designed to include healthcare. And one of the provisions in that is access to a mental health helpline and counselling service as well. But in the meantime, you've got services like this, and the one that's not on there but is a very obvious one to go to as well as Samaritans. People have this misconception it's there for just somebody who's just about to throw themselves off the bridge. You know me, often use phrase, it's not necessarily about risk management in this world that we operate in, personally or professionally. It's about risk mitigation. It's about taking the measures to stop the risk happening in the first place or getting worse. Let's wait until we're having to manage the risk, as in, we're taking that unfortunate step that people find themselves sometimes having to, or feeling they have to take. So don't feel that organisations like Mind or Samaritans are for people who are already diagnosed with a mental health issue or somebody who's right on the edge. They're designed to help people to stop getting to that very dangerous edge, and to also help them as the symptoms emerge of a potential mental health challenge and know where to go for support as well. So sorry to bang on about this, but it's a really important topic to me personally, and I'm pretty sure people see why in terms of their own lives as well. Okay, any questions? I think is the next slide, or is it training and CPD?
Training CPD.
Training CPD, just a quick one on that. The team's going to send out shortly. We've got some free course vouchers for members. So we're going to give members some free vouchers so they can spend them on our normally paid for courses. I'm not, again, suggesting you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, doing nothing during the lockdown. But I know that last lockdown, quite a few people wanted to do some more training because they did have a bit more time in their diaries to update their skills and professional knowledge. And there's a range of courses in the academy that can be used to do that. And it's maybe now a time to reflect before you go back into full-time training again, are the things you need to brush up on. So we'll shortly send members an update about how to claim those CPD vouchers and what courses they can be used on. But regardless, there are also in the DIA Academy a number of free webinars and short courses that we've either made free during the COVID crisis or were free anyway, that you might benefit from during this time of perhaps reflection as much as worrying and concern. But as much as thinking about the situation you're in, I know many of you will be thinking about the situation beyond this period and moving positively forward, and some of that can include some training and CPD. So if we can help in any way, that's what we're looking to do.
Yeah, we've got quite a few, a lot of online courses scheduled in for the next few months. We've got one tomorrow. Some of them are paid for, but we're trying to be mindful of, finances and keeping things as low as we can. As I say, we've got some vouchers and things and offers coming up. We've got some dates as well for more courses coming up. You've probably seen some of the emails that we've sent out recently. So if you've got any questions about those, then let us know. And if also on the subject of mental health, because it is extremely important, if it's something which you feel that you would like us to, get involved with in terms of training for ADIs and things like that, let us know. If you could email training@driving.org and just let us know, because I think it would be a good thing to add, but obviously we need to know that people would like to have that addition as well. So that would be great.
Mental health first aider and those kind of, So in that context, we're talking about are there mental health resources we can provide that have got a training element to them, in terms of our academy? Also, they've had some thoughts around people being trained as mental health first aiders to help the industry.
Yeah, so it's for you as the trainer, and also signs and symptoms and things to watch out for with your pupils or anyone else that you could come into contact with. A bit like our level 3 safeguarding course that we run as well. So that you can use that as a trainer with a rider, driver, whatever you are, and you can also use it externally to the industry and your career as well. So those sorts of things are very good and often very overlooked, but the information that are on those courses is so important, especially now.
Yeah, and you know yourself, your role as a trainer is not just a trainer of driving or riding. You become a confidant sometimes. You become somebody that people will confide mental health issues, or you can see them emerging in a pupil and you don't necessarily know what to do about those. So we're anxious in the sense of safeguarding to make sure you can offer that support, but do it in a way that protects you and the pupil as well. So I think that's a really good thing for us to get involved in. I'm just conscious we've been on here now for an hour and a half, mainly because I've been waffling on, so apologies about that as usual. Should we deal with some real killer questions to finish off with? We will, of course, take as many of these questions forward as we can, especially the ones we haven't been able to answer in accurate detail today.
Yeah, if I could start with one of them, please. There's one I've just lost off the screen. Sorry about that. It's a question that said, when we get up and running, do we think that the DVSA will ask the examiners to work overtime to help with the backlog? The only way they can work overtime is if slots are provided for later in the evening, and perhaps to do Sunday tests again, like we did back in about 2006, 2007. I think that happened in certain parts of the country. So the only way you're going to get this backlog down in that way is if weekend tests take place and we test back to about 7 o'clock at night in the summer like we did before. We don't know if the DVSA will do that, but that's probably one of the options that they're most likely to take.
Well, I mean, it is very unfortunate, this third lockdown, and also in the sense of this, in that before we got to this point, DVSA were starting to be able to roll out some of those measures. So they were increasing the number of tests per day. They were going to weekend testing. They had a buyback scheme for holidays from examiners, so examiners could choose to work with, and get compensation for the fact they were working through their holiday periods. And so, I mean, obviously, there's some limiters on some of the measures because they have to be agreed with the individual examiners and who's willing to do it, although there is actually a very motivated workforce there that does want to do everything they can to help catch up. And obviously the unions also have an impact on what's, rightly, if looking out for their members' interests, what's safe for them to do in terms of an exposure to a number of tests per day and things like that. But there is this, want from DVSA to look at all of those options, and that's what they were trying to do before lockdown, and it's become even more important now, so I'm sure they'll be looking at those options again.
Simon's asked
availability, that message also has to go out about with your pupils, getting your pupils to be reasonable, shall we say, about travelling to certain test centres that they might not have been prepared to travel to before, and considering test slots that they wouldn't have considered before, like early morning ones, late evening ones, weekend ones, all those things. Because sometimes, even in the normal run of things, people have said there's no test availability, and we had this in 2017 with the issues with test delays. Yet the system has actually said that there are test slots available in some cases. It's just that you've got to travel to them, or they're at unattractive times of the day. So I think it's going to be that meeting in the middle between what customers can do themselves to access slots that are available, but what availability of slots can be increased by DVSA.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon's asked about grant. He's asking about the fourth grant, and he said, will it be based on 3 years as before, but to include the year end April 2020, or the same years as the previous grants?
That I don't know the detail of in terms of the fourth grant, and that's what we'll be seeking to get more information on coming days, as well as waiting for us to send out confirmation on that. I would very much recommend people do keep an eye on things like Money Saving Expert as well, because it's their entire full-time job to update this kind of information for all kinds of consumer and business. So I can see that they update that information. They've got a whole team of journalists and researchers working on this data, so I can see that they update that on an hourly hourly basis. So I think, you know, they're amongst, and I know the government, the Treasury and people like that do actually release things to people like Money Saving Expert because they know it's such a popular consumer channel. It'll get the messages out very, very quickly. So keep an eye on the media and websites like that, as well as we'll try and get that information out to you as soon as we possibly can if we glean it from somewhere.
Yeah. Alex has asked for the vouchers. I think you mean the CPD vouchers. Will they be emailed and are members able to log on to the website? So yeah, so once we've sorted that out and we've got that ready for you, we'll be sending you an email. There won't be anything posted or anything like that. You'll be emailed a code generally as we've been done in the past, something along those lines. And log on to the website. I mean, yes, absolutely. As a member, you go to driving.org and you can access all your member information in there. You can also go through the COVID, the toolkit, and all that information there that we put out before. All that is still there. The COVID compliance mark is in there as well. So if you haven't gone through that yet, I'd advise you do go through that. And also our DIA Academy is where all of our webinars are stored on there. So we record them all. And so they are all on diaacademy.co.uk. You do, if you want to sign up for our, as being extremely popular, 3 free, easy for me to say, courses, which is the introduction to safeguarding. So not our level 3, not the accredited course, but the basic introduction one, the standards check essentials and the drug and alcohol awareness. So those ones there are part of the 3 free courses deal that members can offer. You can get that deal, and they are accessed via the Academy website. But what you have to do is register with the Academy website first of all. So we know that we've had, just to put that out there, in case anyone's trying to muddle through, we've answered a few of those recently. So that's just a top tip for you. Register with that website and then you'll be able to access those.
Mark, have you got any advice that you want to give or any questions that you want to raise specifically for the rider training community at this time?
I don't think there's anything, you know, a lot of everything that you've covered it applies for both rider training and ADIs, with the exception, of course, if you're an ATB holder, of course, you've got more costs involved. I know, you know, a lot of ATBs rent their grounds. All they can do is talk to the people that they rent their grounds off and ask if they can suspend their payments. And just explain, you know, what we can't do. You know, most ATBs don't have business rates, so we can't claim on that scheme. Most of them rent the training grounds. So you can only talk to the people that rent the ground off to see if you can get some form of cost reductions. A lot of ATBs have thought about de-insuring their bikes during the lockdown. If you do want to change the insurance on your bikes, because fleets in rider training are a lot larger than fleets in car training, just be careful. If you do take them off cover for insurance, you will have to make them SORN on the DVLA website as well, which could also cause problems when you get to put them all back on again. I know a number of ATBs SORNed them all in lockdown 1, and then all of a sudden had a massive bill at the end of lockdown to put them all back on tax again. So you just need to think about that. But certainly those that have got grounds that they rent for training, talk to your providers. They are sympathetic, and you just have to see where you go with that. But other than that, the majority of the financial stuff is relevant for either ATBs or to driver trainers as well.
Even if you're an ADI and you do have premises, which I know is unusual in the ADI space, but if you do have premises, it is worth looking at what your local authority, because in terms of these premises, rate relief, business rate relief, and some assistance with premises, that tends to be distributed at a local authority level, and some local authorities are better than others at supporting local business. So it might be worth having a look through your local enterprise hubs, Chamber of Commerce, all those kind of people, what other support there is for people who've actually got either training premises or retail premises for what they do as well. Howard, is there anything on the vocational and fleet side that you would want to flag for people?
No, just the people that are going training, just ensure that if you are asked to go and do training for an organisation, that they can prove to you that they are exempt from everything and that you should be there. As we know, as you said earlier on, Carly, about the powers the police have to stop if they feel that there is something taking place in terms of training that shouldn't be. It can come back on the AGI, although the AGI is not in charge of the vehicle when it comes to doing fleet. The AGI can still be reported to the DVSA for training when perhaps it shouldn't be. So you must ensure that the organisation that's asking you to do training has got grounds to be able to ask you to do it.
Yeah, and it'd be useful for those organisations that are sending that advice to their, or asking trainers, that they clarify that they are in the right doing that, and maybe clarify to DIA and other organisations what they're doing, so we can help spread the message that what they're doing is justified. But as we said, the advice is different from DVSA at this moment in time, and they have seen the emails that fleet companies are sending to drivers, and they are contradicting it. So if you've got an argument, maybe if you're a trainer, maybe ask your training outfit to let us know what the validity is of their decision to continue training, and we can spread the word about that. All right, Olivia, anything else you want to round up on, or any last minute killer questions that we should be answering here and now?
Well, there was a couple of questions. I mean, Williams asked, are there any facts and figures on instructors and examiners catching COVID? Not that I know of, but
I think so at the moment. But I suppose it's harder to get a handle on. Examiners, it's a question I asked DVSA in terms of, as employers, they should be kind of registering what the infection rate is amongst their workforce.
Yeah, okay. Andy said about the free courses, easy for me to say, took you to expire link. Andy, we'll get your details and get in touch with you about that. That's a simple fix. We can sort that out. Ahmed, I still pay franchise fee £207 a week, and I don't have income. So that is something which we've Carly's spoken about earlier on. Hopefully you heard that the responses there, Ahmed.
On franchise, just briefly, it's very hard for us to do something with contractual franchise agreements if there isn't any kind of clause that, the thing I would look at, and I've got each individual contract with each company is different, so I can't speak for every single situation. But come to us if you've got a real problem and see whether we can help or mediate in some way, particularly if there's an extreme financial hardship argument. Dealing with a couple of those with a couple of the national franchises at the moment. It also is worth looking at what you bear in mind, that you pay them a fee for a service for them to provide. And I think a little bit like the DVSA, franchises can sometimes market you that they're doing something for your own good to get you in, but when you're actually working for them, you become a bit of a second-class citizen, even though you earn the money and you pay them a fee, and they're supposed to provide services to you. So look very closely at the contract in terms of, is there anything that can get you out of the contract in terms of paying it reasonably? And it's got to be reasonable. They've still got to operate their business. They still have lease liability on the cars that they're providing to you and all those services. But also, is there an argument in that they are contracted in the terms and conditions to provide certain services for you, and you're paying for those services? If you look at some of those services that they're contracting to you in the agreement to provide, and they're not providing them, and they're not offering you any discount or payment deferral, there may be a case for you to put to them that you are not, for example, if it's stipulated in your franchise contract that they will provide you with pupils and they are not providing you with pupils at this moment, or a marketing service for pupils, you may want to make an argument that you pay a fee and there is a specific service that you're paying for that you're not being delivered at the moment, so you're not receiving the goods and products. So can you negotiate a reduction on that element of it as well? We know they're not earning money either, and that's why they, to keep operating, they have to, limit what their exposure is to cutting costs, cutting income rather. However, it could be that there are some arguments to be made by ADIs that the franchise is not providing these goods and services at the moment they're contracted to, and that is a stronger argument for something a little bit more than a franchise fee deferment to another month. It could be that you're not liable to pay that fee at all because you haven't received the goods and services contracted. So have a look at that individually, and if you think there are cases of that happening that you can signpost, we can help you look at that and make a case if we think it's valid.
Okay, we don't have any other questions at the moment.
Okay, well, that's great for now. I'm sure there will be loads, but and we've got loads to take back. It's been a real marathon session, so thank you everybody for bearing with us today. I don't make an apology really, other than for me waffling. I make an apology that, but I don't make an apology that sometimes these things overrun, because there's just so much that we have to discuss and there's so many questions. So I'd rather stay online and answer all the questions and cover all the points off, rather than try and rush through it to some kind of time limit. Thanks to those who stay with us. Those who've had to go, completely understand that. You can catch up on whatever else we've been talking about here. Keep your questions coming to us. Importantly, keep coming back to us with what you're seeing on the ground and issues that you're seeing that may not have been realised yet by stakeholders. You know, there's always provision being made and things being done and things being designed by people who are, you know, way back from that front line that you're at, and they don't necessarily understand the context you're operating in or the issues you're facing. So if you don't think provision is being made or advice is being given for the particular set of circumstances you're facing, let us know, because it could be a problem impacting a lot of ADIs that nobody's realises a problem. And the solution could be pretty easy. It's just raising the problem in the first place. So any ideas you have, any solutions, any issues you're encountering, whether they're very localised or could be a problem on a national basis, please let us know about those, because often in these processes, that's what helps us create solutions for the majority as well. But you know, keep going. I know this is getting a tired message now to keep ploughing on and keep going. But if you can't feel like you can't keep going, as we said before, you know, seek some support and help. If we're the first port of call, so be it. We'll help you find some support that's a little bit better, you know, trained than we are in this respect. But I hope that we'll continue to talk to you throughout this lockdown and offer you advice. But I hope we're able to come back to you soon with some things that are a bit more light at the end of the tunnel. And just thank you all from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of my team for all of your continuing support and, you know, your inputs and your feedback, because, you know, you've kept us going throughout this crisis as well.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
And thanks to my team, because, you know, without the team, you are nothing. So, you know, I owe them a great debt as well, because they've really pulled out the stops throughout this crisis. So both members and team, you know, thank you very much for me personally, but, you know, in general as well. It's the industry's really proved itself, I think, during this crisis in terms of, you know, its mettle and its professionalism. I think that's been, you know, really encouraging to see. All right then, guys. Well, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you.
We can all get some and a toilet break.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.